Chris.
Okay, so thank you. Look, this was an opportunity just to give a brief verbal update as to what's happening in the gravel extraction industry and the part we play in that industry. Some of you may have been contacted by members of the gravel industry, or you may not have, but this briefing was basically intended to bring you into the picture of where we are at. So, of course, at the moment, there's two parts to gravel extraction, and I'm really going to cover off one of them, but I'm happy to do an update on the second one. So the second one is we're in the process of the asset management group holding a global consent for gravel extraction on the rivers that we manage for flood control, and that is through the process, and we're working through that to a finalisation. Until that process is finalised, we are under the old system, and the old system is that the asset management group consents the various extractors to undertake their extraction on a 12-month basis, and so every 12 months the extractors and us have a conversation and a new consent is issued. And so we've been talking to industry for a while, at least 2 years, and in the last year I think we've had 4 meetings with them, and part of those discussions has been the availability of gravel in certain locations. And so, of course, we consent the activity because it's part of our river management. It's not because we're operating a mine or a quarry or anything like that. So the gravel that we consent is in the parameters of managing the flood control. So we determine the various technical details around that. We survey the rivers on a 3-yearly basis, and then we determine the amount of available gravel to meet our flood control objectives, and we don't remove gravel from below the grade line of the river. So here's a diagram basically showing along the Tangaroa where the gravel is available. And the historic area where a lot of material is taken from is between that sort of 40 and 51. And as you can see, the gravel is essentially depleted in that area. And so what we have been signalling to industry is that we'll be reducing the allocations out of that area. And so that's where this year we've been very careful to only allocate material where it is available, given the view that we've been signalling to industry for some time that this was going to happen, and so it's now happening. So we've had a fair amount of concern from both the extraction industry, the processors, and companies who make concrete. There is an acknowledgement that we have been having this conversation, some of them of the view that they didn't understand the quantity or the quantum of some of those reductions. So we're just working through that. As a response, we've brought forward our next survey, and we're doing really an interim survey basically now because the survey data that we are operating on at the moment is 3 years old, and the next survey data was due to be done next summer. And as part of the LTP and what we spoke to you about is some of the techniques we use to do that. And so we're now going to a full sort of LiDAR 3D survey of the full river rather than cross sections every kilometre or so along the river, and that gives us a much better view.
This is a useful context to explain that the extraction industry have their processing assets currently located largely where those extraction sites are. So there's a significant amount of capital investment that sits where the status quo, if you like, resides.
So that would characterise a couple of the larger operators. These are other operators who have put their plant in areas where there's plenty of availability, and there's also operators who are more sort of roving around based on their contracts, and they have a different sort of plan. But it is true that some of the larger extractors have been on that site for probably 50 years or so, and they have significant investments in their processing plants and capacity there. So this graph.
Question about
Yep.
that. Would an example of that be Allied Concrete down there at Duffmary Road?
Well, given that this is a public session, I wasn't going to mention specific names. This was to give you a broad outline.
I was just thinking, when you're just thinking examples of huge investments, large amount of capital stuck in a place. Don't answer the question, thank you.
But going to that though, there was no point where Hawke's Bay Regional Council promised that their lifetime of extracting gravel from that site has ever been given. So
absolutely,
yeah, right.
So they only ever had a 12-month consent at any point in time, and part of the benefit of the new consent was to enter a new arrangement where we could give a longer-term commitment to the right amount of material,
Yep.
with perhaps a base and variable component. So there's a lot of advantages in going to the new system for the industry, and they generally supported the shift. So this shows the net supply to the Ngātaroto, and that's the net supply is the green part. So that is basically the material coming in, and as you can see, it probably averages around 200,000 cubic metres per annum, and it's extremely episodic. It's not like, because it's basically due to the flood condition of the river. We probably need a mean annual flood to have any decent effect on the movement of gravel. And if we, in large events like Cyclone Bowler and some of the stuff we've seen down on the Ashburton, you can see there's significant gravel coming through the system.
Excuse me, Chris.
Yep.
On that graph in the previous one, with your blues and your allocations and things, is the quality of rock the same throughout that graph?
No, so the quality of material is different in different locations, and I haven't brought that information with me. And there's also some technicalities around, testing and proving particular sources for particular products.
So where people are particularly keen, or according to your graph, it's over-allocated, it's probably the higher quality material.
I would say it's suitable for their use, and given that there's other areas where some of that high quality product is taken, it's not that that's just the only area.
Oh, okay.
There's other areas as well. And this shows the extraction from the Ngātaroto historically, so around the 300,000. So the headline story is we're extracting more than is being replenished, and so at some point we naturally need a reduction. That said, we could have a massive event next week or next year that brings a whole lot of material down, so it's totally up to the river behaviour. I won't go into that graph. This is showing a similar story in other rivers. Turaikuri is not a huge player. Waipawa, heaps of material available in Waipawa.
Sorry, Christian, just in geographical terms, what is the purpose of gravel? Does it have a role to play in creating land or pushing out to sea and supporting beaches?
Yeah, so look, gravel is really important to the economic development of the whole of Hawke's Bay. So it's used in developing land as fill. It's used in creating products to create roads and maintain roads. We use it as the regional council to renourish West Shore.
But how does nature use it naturally?
So, well, I think that nature is part of the sediment budget of the land and sea. So some of this material would come out the river mouths and make its progress along the coast, and again that's highly episodic. And I think it roughly takes 400 years or so for material to come from the mountains all the way down.
I guess that's what I was looking at, is obviously we have a lot of sediment built up now. Is that actually stopping it from flowing out the river?
So certainly if you look at some of the modifications, I think the new Ngātaroto is, we're not seeing material come out of that river. That's a man-made channel, and I'm haven't seen any numbers of material coming out. Material still comes out of the Tuki River, for example, and again, it's highly episodic year by year.
I understood that the gravel had moved 400 to 500 metres down the freshly made channel,
Right.
but it hadn't got to the thing there. And that's the pace at which it moved, so I was sort of quite surprised.
Again, up to the most. So this is the most important.
Sorry, could you just go back to that upper Toki?
Yep. Or previous.
So that area 1 to change it as 1 to 8 is presumably the focus of
Very much downstream. Most of the focus. This is the Tuki River, as opposed to the upper Tuki scheme.
Right.
And a lot of the material in the upper Tuki scheme is actually in the Waipawa River.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Which is this one here, showing this middle section where our scheme is having massive availability.
But very little
Yeah.
request and allocation.
Yep. But the key, because we could get into all sorts of detail on this, that the key is this one here. The big issue is that we've effectively allocated what industry has asked for, and you can see that in these charts where the orange line is what we've allocated and the dark blue is what's been requested on each of the rivers. It's more or less there. The issue is that it's around the location, and so that drives cost. If it's not exactly where you want it or you thought it would be, and you have to truck it in, there's obviously a cost element with that. So what we're saying is there's no shortage of material, but there perhaps is a cost impact to that material. And then this also raises issues around truck movements past houses, and all that sort of stuff. So there's some sensitivities around that. The other big issue is that when you look at the declared volume versus the allocated volume, the declared volume in theory is the actual extraction that has taken place. And if we look at the cohort of extractors in totality, they only take a third to a quarter of what is allocated. So this is a part of the discussion as well, that although everyone is requesting huge amounts of gravel, in reality not all of it is used. And then this raises the questions around whether the declarations are correct.
Take or pay contracts.
Well, the levies are based on what they declare that they take, and obviously we've had limited ability to do round-the-clock compliance and enforcement to audit of that. Now, as I understand it, the industry is claiming that it needs to use much more than it has done historically. Now, there's clearly a construction boom on, and there's an element of truth to that. But it may be that there has been some under-declaration historically as well.
Possibly, or it's simply everyone's aware of the contracts in place, everyone requests materials for those contracts, but there's only one winner, so to speak, in those contracts. So the same gravel is being asked for, 10 or 20 different times. So that's the other. So it's very difficult to work through. Certainly, in terms of our monitoring of the gravel take, we are now again getting drones and things involved to actually map material before it's taken out, and then map the material after it's been taken out. We can get quite specific amounts. We've also ranked all of the extractors from high risk to low risk in terms of their compliance activities, so we can spend more time monitoring the higher risk contractors, and that's simply a determination that we've sort of made. And we've also reduced the workload somewhat of the person who inspects all of these sites to ensure they have the maximum amount. But given that we effectively have one FTE monitoring this across the whole region, from the Mohaka down to Central Hawke's Bay, Heretaunga Plains, we've got 30 or 40 extractors in total across multiple sites. It's quite a challenging undertaking. So it's really for your awareness. We're having this discussion. We're doing the best we can to make as much available that is possible. But in terms of those areas that have been over-extracted, at some point we have to draw a line in the sand, and we're beginning to draw that line in the sand now. So this does have cost implications. And so really it's just making everyone aware of the situation.
Just describe, Chris, I'm sorry if you hadn't misheard it, but where we're getting to with the interaction between the Upper Tuki funded program with the
That's my
IRG
question.
funding and solving this issue.
Yeah,
My question. Yeah,
so
thank you.
look, we are very lucky that we have that IRG funding. So we are letting all the extractors know that this funding is available. We're reasonably close to working through a sort of a commercial model where we have a level of assurance we're paying the right amount in terms of compensation. I've also invited particularly some of the larger players before we finalise that commercial model to come back to us with a proposal. So they've taken that on board. And so what we're hoping certainly over the next 2 years while we have this funding, that the effectively subsidised travel from the Upper Tuki can soften the blow, so to speak. But some of the extractors will need to look at what their strategy is, over the next 5 or 10 years.
I'll go one and then two.
Thank you. This is right on point. I just got the following 3 facts in my head, and I'm not quite sure how they align. They relate to James's point. We've got an $8 million project which we're significantly increasing rates to leverage and secure. We've got 3 million cubic metres of excess gravel in the Upper Tuki. We have a flood risk that is ticking away every day. Jerry Greer said to me the other day, he's looking across side to side and it's wall-to-wall gravel. And I wasn't entirely sure, but I think your answer is that the commercial model could deliver the solution here with that government funding to subsidise contractors so that they actually want to dig out what we need them to dig away. My question, do we actually need to move away from a commercial model, get in there with this funding and rip that gravel out ourselves, store it somewhere and sell it later?
So that is our fallback position.
Okay, thank you.
Question, I understand that truckloads of gravel leave Hawke's Bay to go to Auckland.
Yep.
Because of the necessity up there. So how can they make it financially viable to truck gravel out of Hawke's Bay all the way to Auckland, but they can't make it financially viable to truck it from State Highway 50, the Upper Tuki, to Hastings?
So I'd say some of that is the end product. So because I was curious about that myself, and when I looked into it, my understanding is that in terms of decorative concrete, there is material that goes from Hawke's Bay to Auckland for decorative concrete products, such as nice fancy driveways and things, because it has specific properties in terms of the look and feel. So that's my understanding of why some of that material travels so far, because it's a premium product. There's a limited pool for some of those products, and that there's consumers who are willing to pay. But in terms of that material going into road base, etc., I think that would be the exception rather than the rule.
There was one other question, Madam Chair. I know this is delaying things. This is really important, actually, to our flood protection schemes.
Yep.
And we've just put the allocation, the extraction rate from 40 cents to 80 cents. Is that undermining or affecting or cutting across our objectives for the Upper Tuki, or have I got that wrong?
Absolutely not. The rate for participants in the IRG scheme is 0.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Because those costs, we only need to recover the costs of management, and they are being covered by the IRG.
Right, well, that's the
project.
answer to that. Thank you very much.
Just a supplement to that, so I assume after the IRG project's all over and done with, the rate does go up. So does it put us at the risk that it just dead stops for so many years and we get back to square one quicker than we'd hope?
So I guess there's a number of forces. What we're seeing from this graph is that the traditional areas are going to require an area of recovery. So the volumes from those traditional areas will simply not be available. So the industry will need to determine its course of action in the longer term. And I guess that's something we're always willing to take feedback on. Those rates aren't locked in for the next 10 years. They're locked in for the next LTP. And if there were a major impediment, I'm sure we could go through a process to alter them. But again, the reason it's gone up is that we've done a 10-year modelling exercise of our costs in that area, and that's what we need to recover. We could make the policy decision that the industry doesn't fully fund the activity, and then, of course, those costs would change. And again, that can happen through the annual plan process, no doubt.
Okay, we might hold it there because Chris, this almost sounds like we should have a paper next EICC because it is important and there are discussions going on. So
happy to do that. The purpose of this was really a heads up that these discussions are occurring, so that if anyone hears anything or industry is talking to councillors, they at least have this level of background.
Thank you. Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive the verbal update? Councillor Williams. Councillor Curtin. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you for the update. So we've got our minor items, 2 minor items. So if we can, we've got about 5 minutes left of this meeting. So the first one is Councillor Curtin on wastewater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in terms of Kennedy Road wastewater incident, just wanting to get a bit of an update on that event and explanation, particularly in regard to any incident where the waste material got into the stormwater system.
So our compliance manager, Rob Hogan, was going to come down, although given the timing and lunch and things, he may have had to go to attend other things. I do understand we've had a truck roll over on the state highway down to Central Hawke's Bay loaded with fertiliser that is currently being dealt with. But what I have been advised is that there was a total discharge into the stormwater network that may have reached the estuary of 7 cubic metres. So relative to the sort of discharges that we've had in major storm events, it's relatively minor. And there has been a bunch of ongoing testing by Napier City Council down in the estuary as well. What has limited the quantum of that is that after the call was made to Napier City Council by a member of the public advising them that a manhole cover was had water coming out of it, wastewater coming out of it, was that they got suction trucks to the site reasonably quickly, not instantaneously, as they were all in the district were busy in Hastings dealing with an issue. But within an hour they were there and have managed to obviously hoover up most of what's there. So the Wakarama and yachting folk down at Pandora were advised in a timely manner, as well as the DHB, etc. So in terms of any community interaction with any potential risk, from our perspective, that's been proactively and adequately managed. Look, it was a blocked pipe, we understand, which does happen with wastewater pipes from time to time, and it burst, we're satisfied that Napier City Council has responded in a timely manner, and that there's no negligence on their behalf, and certainly they kept us closely informed and our staff attended the scene.
Just to quickly, finally, just in terms of the consent for wastewater, do we have a role to play, or are we in a position to have a role to play in confirming the infrastructure they've got? And why I raise that is that this is a common occurrence around the country, and it's related, for example, to wipes catching in the pipes and then building up. And I noticed in that incident there was a large amount of fat was deposited, which shows it blanking out. So my question is, do we have a monitoring role on infrastructure that is preventable?
We certainly have a monitoring role with respect to the operation of the infrastructure, and obviously Napier City Council is required to annually report under their consent the performance of those assets and obviously advise us of any incidents of non-performance. With respect to fat build-up and trade waste, so there are trade waste bylaw requirements that sit on Napier City Council that also are a matter for ongoing compliance monitoring on our behalf. I don't have any information at this point to suggest that there's an issue with the compliance on the trade waste that's relevant to this issue. But I guess in terms of the quality of the infrastructure, it's the outcomes that we hold them to and the performance of the assets rather than us having a detailed view, an engineer's view, if you like, of the quality of that. I see Malcolm's here and he might, is there anything you want to add on that?
Yeah.
The question was really in relation to the consent requirements on Napier City Council with respect to the assets and the asset condition. And I guess Councillor Curtin's interested to know if there's any compliance, and there's Rob now too, any compliance monitoring that we do in relation to asset condition.
We condition them and ask them to include in the conditions of consent that there is monitoring and maintenance of their networks. But often we're talking about stormwater, we're often
Wastewater, yeah.
Or wastewater, wastewater certainly got conditions on the maintenance of the network. Looking at I&I, so water things getting inconsistent, requiring to upgrade, monitor and upgrade as required. Check whatever the best one. I'm pretty sure there'll be some type of condition on it.
Can this be some sort of follow-up, please? Just so that we can move along.
That's fine.
Is that fine? Yeah. Thank you. The other
Just
minor...
covered it, Rob, so...
Yeah, sorry, yeah. The other minor item is pollution response. Will?
Yeah, so more than happy for this to be a follow-up too, but just requested from myself a follow-up with regards to pollution response or when we get called out. And so in this example was a call out to a fire, but it could be any situation. So no doubt our response team have some sort of permission to enter private land to inspect whatever it is that they've been called out for. And so just wanted to more information around the policy of that, particularly with regards to driving straight past someone's house to enter their property and with regards to the health and safety risk and all that sort of thing. So
Rob might want to come up and just explain the protocols. Certainly our staff are warranted under the Resource Management Act to enter property to investigate potential breaches of the regional plan, and so they do have the right to enter, but there is a process to go through. So.
Yeah, so they'll definitely try and find someone on the property first, so they'll either go to a house or a cow shed or something like that, because we'll show our warrant to someone and explain why we're on that property. So it's definitely the protocol. That's what they've got to do.
okay, so just in this instance, it sounds like that wasn't adhered to, and the staff just drove straight past a house and went to look for this fire. So
I can, I'm not sure which place it was.
Perhaps we follow that up offline.
For sure. Don't mind following that.
And we just don't want to divulge, I suppose, private information.
Sure.
Yeah. If we can do that, follow up. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, members. That brings us to the closing of our meeting. Thank you. Peter, I might hand it over to you.
This short little karakia you won't find on the app, even though I'm referencing the app. But it's just in advance of all of you being at 6 a.m. down at Aotearangi tomorrow, just to be able to sort of see Matariki. So in advance of that little karakia, it comes from Chief of Waikato, actually a Chief of South Taranaki. His name was Tito Kowaru. Tito Kowaru sent some advice back to his nephew, Te Wahanui, up in Maniapoto. And at that time, Waikato was in serious disrepair from the wars and what had happened up there. Tito Kowaru's advice was to look towards the seasons, those things that we as people don't control, because there is a time when there's knee-hugging cold, is the expression, and then you move through the seasons, and ultimately you come to a time where you have sustenance and food, subject to planting, of course. And so this little karakia talks about that. You might recognise some of the months like Here Turikoka, Hongongoi, Pipiri. Pipiri is where we are at the moment. So it goes a wee bit like this. Te reo hea matariki kua noho ki ngā pari o tautoru. Kua mohi o tātou ko ia te kai rūri o te tau. tahi ke pipiri rua ke hongongo e tore ke here turi kōka. Ka whāwhārua tai I mua here ngā nuku I mua here ngā rangi, ki tua o here ngā kerekere. Ka kerekere te wai, ka kerekere te patu, ka kerekere te tangata. Ka noho are e hua, ka heke I hua uruao, ka tō te kai, ka tō te tangata. E kua hawhānui whakapuare tia ki te puna kai rāua ko te puna tangata. Ka ora te mea, ka ora te mea. Tēnei te mihi kia tātou, ngā kai kaunihera, tēnā koutou turu whakamaua kia tīna.
Tīna.
Yeah, hui e. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Kia ora, Piri.
See you at 6 a.m. in the morning.
Ka whai.
I've had my matariki.
Thanks, Rob. I do like 20